We are going to set up your computer so you can do your low poly project. The first thing you want to do is open Photoshop, and you want to go up to the word Photoshop and go down to Preferences and click on Guides, Grid, and Slices. A pop-up will appear, and in the gray area it should say Guides, Grid, and Slices. In the grid area, we want to choose the color light red. Next, we want to choose the dotted line. Grid lines, we want to choose pixels. We want to change the number to grid line every 10 pixels. Finally, change the subdivisions to 1. Now you can click OK. If you ever need to go back into here, just know that if you need to change this color, you can always go back into here and choose another color if that color isn't standing out for when you're using these guidelines. Okay, now we are going to set up an action. So you want to go up to the word Window and click on Window and select Actions. And you will see a pop-up appear. This is your Actions panel. Now you'll notice that the default actions are open. So what you need to do is click the little arrow next to the default actions folder, and that will close the default actions so that they are no longer in your way. Next, we want to load actions, so click the little lines in the top corner of the actions panel. When a pop-up appears, click on Load Actions. Now you need to find the actions that I have prepared for you in group shares. So go to From Your Teacher, Resources, number 34, Low Poly. And then select Low Poly ATN and then click Open. Next, we need to set up a keyboard shortcut. So you want to go up to the word Edit and click on Keyboard Shortcuts. Click. A pop-up will appear, and you want to choose Shortcuts for Panels menu. Now choose Actions and click on Play. In the area that you can type in here, click on the F5 button on your keyboard and now hit OK. We are ready to practice a polygonal lasso. So you're going to open the practice file From Your Teacher, Resources, number 34, Low Poly, and choose the apple. Now we need to set up the grid. So we're going to go to the word View and go down to Show Grid. Now I already had mine on, so I have to do that again. And now we want to go to View, Snap To, and make sure there's a check mark next to Grid. And you'll notice that a grid appears. For this project, you will be using the Polygonal Lasso tool. This tool is located in the drawer with the other lasso tools. Press L on the keyboard or click and hold the drawer to open it to find the Polygonal Lasso. I noticed that I can't really see the grid that well on this apple, so I am going to go back to the preferences and change my little dots for my grid to a different color that I can see a little bit better. So for this apple, red isn't working really well, so I'm going to use a different color. But for your project, you can choose whatever you think is going to work best. Now I want to show you how the polys are going to work. So I just have this blank page with the grid on it, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Put a spotlight around my mouse, and also when I click, you're going to see a red flash on the screen. Now I'm referring to the little dots, and I'm clicking on them, and then I'm double clicking when I get to the last one. So click, 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 double click. And the double click finishes the selection and makes the marching ants go home to where you started. If you use this technique, you'll be able to quickly draw your polys. Here's a couple ways that you can troubleshoot if anything goes wrong after you start drawing. So imagine you click one time and you decide you don't want that to start there anymore. Well, what you need to do is you just need to double click. Now a pop-up will appear with a warning, just hit OK, and that will allow you to start over with the tool. So now you can start over where you want and begin clicking once again. Now imagine you clicked and you finished your poly and you no longer want this. Well, just like any selection, you can hit Command D and that will deselect your selection. Okay, here are a few rules when drawing your polys. So you now know how to draw a poly, but what are the rules? So once you have a poly drawn, when you go to draw the next poly, you have to make sure that the next time you draw a poly, you start with the one adjacent side, and that adjacent side needs to match the poly that was already drawn, like this. Now the remainder of that poly can go in any direction that you want, so as long as it just has the 3 sides. So now you click to end it, click another time, and then go back home, and then you have another poly, and that should match up perfectly with one side of your first poly. And continue finding adjacent sides for every new poly that you make. Now the action that was made will help you, but you do have to re-record part of it so that it knows what layer to reference when you're trying to pull your colors from your photograph. Begin by opening the photograph that you want to refer to for your poly project. Press Command J to duplicate the background layer. So once again, find your Actions panel. And next, find your Layers panel and click on the background layer. Next, go up to your Actions panel. Click the little arrow next to the folder that says Low Poly. Next, click the arrow next to where it says LP. Then click on the words that say Select Layer, Layer 1. Look for this small circle. This is the record button. Press record. With it recording, click on layer 1. Now go back up to the Actions panel and hit stop. On the Actions panel, click the original Select Layer, Layer 1 and press the small trash can to delete it. You'll see a pop-up appear and it will ask you to delete the selection and you'll hit OK. Now when you begin this, you want to look for a lot of the different lights and darks. So you want to find the values, and that's what's really going to determine where you're going to put your polys. So where a light meets a dark, that is where you should place a line. So if you notice where this highlight is on the apple, that is where I started my first poly. Once you've created a poly, we now have an action that will make that poly into a solid shape for us. So use the polygonal lasso tool, draw a triangle, go to your Actions panel and make sure the LP arrow is pointing towards the letters LP and it's closed, and make sure that it is also selected. So make sure LP is selected. Now you need to go to your Layers panel and make sure Layer 1 is selected. Check to see that you still have marching ants around the area that you want to fill in. And now hit F5 on your keyboard and that will create a new layer with a poly on it. Now you just continue the process. So you make another poly and hit F5. Go ahead and hide the background layer and then also hide layer 1 and you can start to see your polys. Now you're going to notice it's starting to get difficult to actually see your polys. So here's my trick for you. Keep the background layer turned off, but turn back on the visibility of layer 1. Click on layer 1 and then go up to the opacity. Slide the opacity of layer 1 less than 100. I like to keep it somewhere in the 80s. And what this does is that it's going to let you see your polys, but it's going to reduce the opacity of the original apple. Now the only problem is that the new polys will be a lot lighter when you create them, but we can always raise their opacity later. So I think the benefits outweigh the kind of the cons out there, because it really makes it a lot easier to see when you have the opacity reduced of your picture layer. Now, as you continue making polys, be very aware of the adjacent sides. Also, be careful to notice where the lights and darks are. So you want to keep your triangles within the light and dark areas. So you, again, make your adjacent side and just make sure you're not kind of overlapping where it's light and dark. Now, if you notice on this example, I keep hitting the play button. It's because of that highlighted arrow that I have. Because I have the highlight on, it does not allow me to use my function keys. So I have to just hit the play button on the actions. But if I didn't have this highlight on, it would work. Now here is just a high-speed version of completing this project. So please just check it out, and so you can get an idea about the size and shape and placement of all of the triangles for this project. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you're noticing that every once in a while I do select the grayed out layers, the soft layers. So by holding shift and then I hover over the opacity and just slide that up to 100, and they go back to their full opacity. I never do turn the apple layer back to full opacity. I just make sure that I'm doing that to the layers that I'm creating new, because they just match the opacity of layer 1. So that's why they look soft until I hold shift and select them all. And then I just, once they're all selected, I will hover over the word opacity and slide it up to 100, and it will go to the full opacity. You may also notice that I have a gray layer on here. I just made a new blank layer and filled it with the paint bucket with gray so that I could see what this looks like, on a gray background instead of white. It kind of helps me see any gaps or any places that I missed. So there you go.